Welcome back to Everyday Esoteric, where we make the Eso a little bit more teric. We're picking up where we left off with that fella Damien Echol in his book and continue to unravel the mysteries of reality. Here we go. Simply put, the occult and esoteric things are not evil, and I promise. I mean, we're already talking about God. You may hear esoteric and the occult and think Satanism and black magic. But first, let's break down the terms occult and esoteric. The definition of occult is something secret or not revealed. And esoteric is likely to be understood only by a small number of people, often with specialized knowledge or interest. I really enjoy this definition because to me it implies that people who have a profound interest in trains or Sonic the Hedgehog could be considered esoteric occultists. And I'm not poking fun at these people with specialized interests. I'm simply pointing out how mundane these words actually are. Black magic is also ignorantly charged, and it is often used in connection with anything that's not Eurocentric or Christian. When you hear black magic, our pop culture brains immediately think of Satanism, witchcraft, and Hollywood voodoo. I can also imagine if you hear white magic, you think of Love and Light, LA shaman gurus, and that nice lady that charges you $300 to realign your chakras but won't do it for a penny less. The difference, other than projecting sins of the ego and casual racism, there isn't. Actually, I think I pointed out some of those things they have in common further prove my point into how dissimilar they are and how little you may understand them. All of these things are often used improperly, stolen from, or disrespected in any combination of creative ways that you can think of. There's nothing about one that makes it darker or more evil than the other. And I have met incredibly good-hearted brujas that have worked wonders, and I personally know and have worked with people who practice Palo Mayombe and Santeria. Some of my best friends are indigenous shamans that work the ways of their ancestors, and they were taught by their ancestors who are still actually part of the communities that develop these practices. Magic isn't what makes you bad. It's effectively what you do with it. There's nothing evil about this. I mean, maybe if you're a devotee in whatever religion you belong to, and it's viewed as such, and you can call us rambling schizophrenics or heretics at worst, but we're simply intending to shed some light on ancient mysteries. On this podcast, we adhere to people having their own moral compass, and that is to say that morality may have developed as a function of society, and different cultures have their own sense of morals. We respect an individual's rights to personal freedom and their ability to think freely. One of the most important and fundamental aspects of being a human being and having the human experience is the power of free thinking. True evil, I feel, is created the moment someone tries to limit or remove that from another person. And, coming up, we'll have a discussion on the inclusion of the pentagrams, and we'll cover Satanism later on. But we're not communing with the devil as you think of it. If we do communicate with the devil, it's the devil within ourselves. We might commune with it and get to know it, understand it, accept it.
I think the devil is trying to get you right now.
Oh, I don't know what the cat is doing.
I'll tell you what, with Audacity open, I am acutely aware of how powerful my microphone actually is.
Yeah, when you have like a really good recording software, you end up hearing more because it's just like raw sound coming through. Hopefully that comes out in post. But where was I? Yeah, we might commune with the devils inside of us, but please understand that we do this as a way to understand it and accept it, so that we can become something greater than we were before. It doesn't matter if it's addiction, warfare, sports, or whatever. The fact is, the more you know about your opponent, the better you can be at whatever it is that you want to accomplish in regards to that hurdle or battle. In the Western esoteric traditions, there is a hierarchy of spirits, with the demons being some of the lowest. Some even consider both angels and demons to be manifestations of certain functions of psychology. I've even heard explanations that make them aspects of a person's persona. And you'll see as we dive deeper, you'll probably have to make your own judgment on how real they are. However, I can attest that they are as real as the thoughts you are having right now. High magic or ceremonial magic is a general catch all for the Western esoteric tradition. Like I mentioned earlier, it's rooted in parts from Hermeticism and Gnosticism, and these philosophies themselves respond in part from ancient Hebrew, Greek, and Egyptian mystical philosophies. The Qabala itself, that is coming out of Jewish and or Hebrew mysticism, and it becomes the skeleton of the Western esoteric traditions. So without the Kabbalah, effectively without old Jewish mysticism or the stories that created a lot of the Christian mythos, effectively, we wouldn't have this. So the Kabbalah itself is not a book. It's not a religion. At best, it's a philosophy. I like to say that Kabbalah is rather a school of thought and a way to, like I believe I mentioned it earlier, it's just a way to organize your thoughts and help explain life. I like to think of it as God playing pachinko with itself. And that's a whole topic unto itself that we'll cover later.
I'll be honest, I don't know that I really I don't really think that I believe much of demons and angels myself, and I specifically do remember a Snapchat of how one can get water from the water cooler as explained by Angelisms, and how many angels it takes to move the water from the water cooler uh, it, by by the power of I don't even can you can you re-explain this to me?
So I don't know if I can, because like I said earlier, sometimes it's easier to think of things than it is to explain it. But if we learn to realize or accept the Kabbalah as a way of thinking, and we are thinking along these lines, this includes a hierarchy of archangels to angels to demons. And effectively, the idea is that when you put a thought out into the universe, or pray, or whatever, that becomes manifest by way of the archangels commanding the angels, and the angels commanding the demons to often pursue whatever goal that is. And we'll get into Enochian, much later, and it's something that I don't truly understand. But I believe using some sort of numerology in conjunction with the Hebrew language, you can effectively make or call upon however many different angels there are. I don't remember what the numbers are behind it. And each one of those then are responsible for a specific task or a group of tasks. So when in Alex's example, if you were to go and reach out and or not reach out, if you were to go and ask somebody, like, can you get me a glass of water? It is on our plane of existence. You are asking a question and it's being received by another individual or entity, then that entity is going to fetch the object and then bring it back to you. Now, on the higher planes of existence, each one of those facets of every component of that interaction from start to finish is can be considered to be controlled of or orchestrated by spirits or angelic forces.
Problem I have with that is that it kind of so I don't want to say that there's like a bootstrapping problem here, but the question becomes like, sure, let's say that the process is started. Step zero is I would like a glass of water, and so I'm going to ask unto this other entity to go get me a glass of water because I'm incapacitated in one way or another. And then so begins the machinations of the angels to drive forth the rest of this until it's completed. But where do the machinations of the angels actually begin? Because it kind of sounds like the manifestation of the thought would also be driven by angels.
Yes, and now you're getting into it. That's getting into the core. So in Kabbalistic thought,
But
it can be thought of. So typically, you or I think of life, and if we use basic Christian terms, we are asking God for something, or I feel like it's a very egocentric viewpoint, but I think often in these mystery traditions, it's very easy to think that like the request is coming from us. It's a up approach to uh, tackling a scenario, I guess. But in Kabbalistic thought, it's the inverse. That the everything emanates from, for lack of a better term, God, from source, from Kether. And beyond that, it comes from the nothing that we can't even fathom. So, in a way, that scenario of you asking for water and there being somebody to fetch water there for you originated from the seed, and it becomes a branch or leaves of the oak that is growing from the seed rather than us plucking a leaf off of the tree. Does that make sense?
Well, and so what it does is I guess it answers the question too of, like I had mentioned before, the bootstrapping. So like in my world that I live in, you have a piece of technology such as a microcontroller, and when you power it up for the first time, how does it know what it's supposed to do from the start? And it will usually be set up to have a step zero initialization process. And the getting of the water, the asking of the water being driven by angels, and what everything else being led up to that point being driven by angels. My question was then, what does the Kabbalistic thought suggest is the step zero of all this? And you, I think, mentioned or answered that by pointing out whatever this seed is.
Yeah, it would be the origin itself, not necessarily your thirst. Your thirst and the need with which to quench it originated eons ago. If there ever was a you know a beginning of time, effectively. And it took up until this point for the tree to grow to a point where one branch could then serve another in some function.
Very deep.
Yeah, it's
I do believe I understand why this could be considered esoteric and occult.
what just getting a glass of water.
No, not quite getting a glass of water, but I believe probably applying the angel fueled philosophy to mundane or otherwise nonsense tasks.
Yeah, it's like again, I think this is a use of language that allows us to speak about profound concepts. We are just stuck in our frame of reference. And
Well, no, I get that. It's
you know,
definitely the best we can do given our worldly words to basically try to describe something that we can only imagine in our head as actually working.
right. And that's part of the reason why I'm excited for you to get into like the chicken Kabbalah because Lon Milo Duquette is an amazing author. He's an amazing Freudian slip. He has an amazing writing voice, and he has been able to package these really deep esoteric thoughts in such a way that make it accessible. And again, backing up the symbolism, he's using real life examples to illustrate the functions of how some of these things may work.
Yeah, and I definitely believe it comes off very comical, especially considering now I sent you the meme of the guy, the car salesman slapping the car roof and saying this is how many angels that bad boy could fit in it. And it's it's just reminds me of another YouTube video, the BMX Bandit and the Angel Summoner.
That
If
is
you
outside of
recall
my
that
frame.
one,
No, I don't.
I'll send it to you later.
Okay,
I'll post it down in the chat.
that might be some esoteric, just internet. Um, but I'm going to use this as
Yeah.
a springboard. Now that we're talking about angels and the tree of life, let's talk about some of the rituals that are coming up. Have you gotten to dive into them, or have you read up to the point where you are still just working on the breathing and the energy manipulation?
I have been just working on the breathing and the energy manipulation. I had a chance to read a little bit about the middle pillar this week at some point. I have notes in there. But I think I wouldn't mind asking a few questions about the energy stuff. So, part of what I think I'm trying to do, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong way to be doing the breath and how to better facilitate the visualization. But I have nice noise canceling headphones, and I put myself in my bedroom so that with the door closed and throw my noise canceling headphones on, and I pretty much just focus on the counting of the four and the going through the process of the breathing. And I'm wondering if there's like more of a step that I'm supposed to take after this that he didn't really explain, which is more like, is there a time then where the breathing should become more automatic to not need to consciously count? Or
I think the breathing exercise itself, if we start at it biologically and psychology, the psychobiology of it, so to speak. We know that meditation has whatever benefits for the human body, for the mind. We know that breathing correctly also does that. Does different things. I mean, look into the Wim Hof method. And monks have been doing this or like Buddhist monks have been doing this for Christ knows how long. But there's also symbolism within the fourfold breath, and this is one of the things that where I'm at now on my journey, and I think he makes it a point at somewhere in the earlier parts of his book where he says that the magic kind of teaches you along the way, and I think that's kind of like the point, kind of like if anybody's familiar with the Fool card, card 0, it's that's you approaching the edge of the cliff and you're kind of diving into this carefree. You are from that perspective, just like the Fool, and his journey through the tarot. You're kind of just going forward with it without not necessarily without a care, but without a concern. But the fours of the breathing technique are highly symbolic as well. So 4 is an incredibly important number, as we will see when we get to the Sephiroth and the Tree of Life. I may have some stuff written and some notes coming up here soon. But 4 is also associated with the name of God, the YHVH, the Yod He Vav He, and that in itself dictates the not only the elements but the states of consciousness. It dictates the layers of manifestation as well. So the top being wands, then you have your cups, your swords, your pentacles, and that would be, of course, fire, water, air, and earth. The primordial elements that make up everything. But a component of that is that earth would be the solid matter, and even though it says earth, it's not necessarily rock. I think it does I think a lot of the mystics over time, or magicians, witchcraft, whatever, have a hard time separating, especially in introductory texts, that it's not earth. It is not necessarily the ground around you. It's everything that is manifest in the reality in this plane of existence. It's just matter. So already symbolically, you're kind of aligning yourself with this thought. I believe the fourfold breath is also just present in, is it pranayama yoga, I think. I mean, the number 4 is pretty universal, but as far as this system is concerned, it has to do with that.
so do I have to keep counting to 4 after a
I
point,
didn't
or
even.
is there just
So the idea is like, yes, it also trains you into that natural rhythm. Sorry, I got onto this whole like ontological whatever. Yeah, like over time it does become like more natural. Um, but the meditation on the fours and maintaining that rhythm, I think it is an important meditation in and of itself. But when you go forward and do other things, you do that to establish your rhythm, and ideally, it kind of gets your body and mind into a specific zone of action.
Right, because I think what I ended up struggling with was focusing a lot on the counting to keep the rhythm when I then was also trying to add in visualization and getting them muddled and not being able to visualize, I think, in the manner that I would have liked to, which is, I think, in whatever manner that can imagine I'm supposed to be, which for me, the visualization was and I don't know if I don't know if we touched on this in the first episode, but the visualization that I'm at least trying to do is, in the darkness of my mind, basically, where I've got my headphones on, I've closed my eyes, I'm laying down and relaxing, and then I'm trying to do as he suggests and visualize the energy coming in, holding it, and then visualizing the energy coming out and existing around me. Uh, and I feel like I could probably do a version of it with my eyes open, but it might be easier for me to have the sensory deprivation to better create this sort of thing in my head, unless that's not what I'm supposed to be doing.
No, I think you're onto it. I think it's one of those things that makes it inherently like an internal thing. The the muscle of visualization itself is something that will get worked on over time, especially going into the middle. And I've got commentary on this as well, but going into the middle pillar and then the banishing ritual, the pentagram. Um, it's okay to start small. Again, because it's a muscle that we don't typically use, especially in this way, and then especially in conjunction with other activities. So, kind of whatever you're doing, you're not inherently doing it wrong. It's just a matter of, you know, there's a certain level of like finding what works best for you. If you have to have your eyes open, it's okay. Like I'm at a point now where some of the rituals I perform are eyes open, and I can maintain kind of a visualization in my mind's eye overlaid with what I'm seeing through like my physical eyes.
Right, and I imagine that is the pipeline in a sense.
Yeah, because you're right now you're working up on like the internal, and then that moment that you can do it eyes open, or if you could do it already, that's good. But you still need that internal visualization. You are kind of blending your two minds together, your waking mind, so to speak, and then your unconscious mind.
Okay.
Yeah, and like again, there's some like higher esoteric concepts like that aren't explained. I think in part it's probably just not to get people bogged down because you could really think too hard about it.
I mean, like the book just has like a tattooed dude on it, and it's all of like what less than
It might be 200 pages.
uh might be, it's not 200 pages long, so it's definitely not intended for people to sit and read and take as like perfect scripture by any means.
Yeah, and like I don't want anybody to get the impression that Damien Eccles is some type of grifter that he's steering you wrong. I don't necessarily agree with the methodology, but baseline, like there's other famous occultists, at least within the esoteric, the at least within the esoteric sphere, that have written um, that as long as you're doing your breathing, you have some type of devotional practice, and that could even just be to like making sure that you're on track with your career or with your studies, with whatever. It's serving something higher than yourself. Um, those along with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, and or maybe the middle pillar exercise, which we will cover later. That's really all you need, and that life will teach you along the way. And that kind of goes back, like, brings it back around to why you don't necessarily need a lodge or something with which to like perform this stuff in. Um, there are higher level rituals and things and initiations that you can do and take part of that are highly symbolic, and you're effectively training the subconscious mind. But clearly, like once you, I think it's one of those things where once you get the ball rolling, the ball itself will either guide you or pick up moss, pick up snowball, however you want to think about it. It kind of serves you by serving itself, and vice versa.
Something else that I was curious about is how how many high magicians are there that exist, or people who sort of go into this line of thinking and philosophy? How many of them go in skeptic and just stay that way?
I don't know, because like we've been like talked about before, like I'm already kind of primed to think this way or believe in this stuff. But I have to admit that when I first started this path, I was, I believe in something, I guess like an afterlife or something energetically. I didn't really have language for it. Um, I didn't really believe anything that seems remotely theological like this. But since getting into this, and once I was able to strip away my programming as to what like religion or theology was, or what the concept of God could be, um, it kind of unfolded for me very differently. And then too, like for me, just becoming more aware, just a higher level of awareness in general, allows you to see the synchronicities and the patterns that are around you and throughout the universe.
Yeah, I definitely am expecting to stay very skeptical and speculative, and I think it maybe is just because I'm not primed and that I don't have any particular background or even forced or otherwise, as I know some people were when it came to like church as a kid. But I definitely expect my technology brain, my physics and math brain, to betray me a lot when it comes to, I think, maybe doing some of the more, I don't want to use the word faith, but faith based parts of this stuff.
What would you consider faith based? At least so that we have like a general understanding of a skeptic's view of faith.
So for this particular thing, the part that I believe you need to have faith in is that, not that it would work from a self-help perspective, but that it would work from a ability to change reality depending upon your definition of reality.
I don't think that it inherently changes reality. I think it brings you closer to whatever the flow of reality is. Like,
Right, and the way you say that kind of implies that you may be working off of a slightly different definition of reality than what the average everyday person may be doing so. And that may ultimately come from what I have as the reservation or the lack of faith, in that it maybe is not a lack of faith, if I want to give myself the benefit of that doubt, and that it is instead someone is working from a different definition of some things. And by the definitions that people are using, what this describes as possible may not be. And that might be what I mean when I say that I don't have faith in one thing or another, and it's just because of what constructs I use versus what other constructs other people could use, or you listener may be using currently.
yeah, so it kind of might boil down to like a syntax error. Like the language doesn't always compute or does not always commute with one another.
Like you already touched on, as it is currently, there's a lot of things that there is a problem describing, or there's a struggle to describe and sort of express with language anyway.
Yes,
And
and
so
well, and as you see that is in part why like the Western esoteric tradition that has its roots in Kabbalistic thought often resort to the Hebrew language when it comes to the mystical and the magical component of this. So, segueing into that, the rituals of High Magick, again being rooted in Kabbalistic thought, stemming from Hebrew mystics, are naturally centered around the usage of the Hebrew language. I'll speak ahead and say that I'm sorry that if we pronounce any Hebrew wrong or weird, understand it's not my first language. But by the time we're all done with this, it might be a close, if not butchered, second, at least in the context of mysticism. We should at least be familiar with the basics of the Hebrew alphabet and scratch the surface of its symbolism. The pronunciation of ancient Hebrew is often debated as the people who spoke it are no longer around, and like any language, the use and meaning may change over time. I've even heard that ancient Hebrew may have been made to be read and maybe not be spoken and be used in a ritual context. Now, I don't know the true history of that. I'm sure somebody else might be able to elucidate that better. But a famous example of how even this language has changed over time is the debate at Mark 19:24. And it says, this is one that I actually wrote down. And it says, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And the debate stems from the translation of the word camel in a story that is written in Hebrew about things that people said in Aramaic and then finally translated into English for us all to be inspired by. The Aramaic word for camel is gamla. The Hebrew word is gimel. But those are also, coincidentally, the same word for rope. So the basic idea is, that I feel like the general messaging of this story might still be the same, but it still stands to point out that even these texts were ripe for mispronunciation and mistranslation. So
Did you also flip a brick and turn it into an empire?
yeah, of course. As a magician, that's what we do every day. But pretty much all of the coming rituals, and we've talked about some of them, like the middle pillar and the banishing ritual of the pentagram. They all are going to utilize Hebrew, so we have to get comfortable with it. This is because the ancient Kabbalists, like I said, they wrote in Hebrew, and these mystics were very selective of its usage. And they were selective of its usage because they understand that language is powerful. So I'm going to discuss briefly the Hebrew language so we can have a basic understanding.
So before you get too far ahead, the one of the things that I thought was interesting is that you mentioned that this is a language that's meant to be read and not spoken, at least as far as maybe what we're understanding here. Which I thought was interesting, just from the perspective of the fact that I write code a lot, and a lot of the code that I write is absolutely not meant to be spoken. It is meant to be read, and ultimately it's meant to be read. It's boiled down farther and farther until it's meant to be read by a machine. But the way that programming languages are set up is definitely not for speaking. So it isn't surprising to me that there might be a language that is specifically for instructions on a ritual that is meant only to be read.
Yeah, and like I'm going to get to that exactly here in a second. So Hebrew is based around the highly symbolic 22-letter alphabet. Remember, these letters represent things, but it does not necessarily mean that they mean these things in a literal translation. For example, the letter Aleph means ox. And one possible thing that it relates to or represents is the aeration of soil by pulling a plow along with an ox and the fertility that that will bring. So, breaking down the Hebrew alphabet even more, there are 3 mother letters that represent the primal elements of air, water, and fire, 7 double letters, which represent the 7 classical planets. Everybody should be familiar with this through astrology, Greek and Roman mythology, and the days of the week. And then 12 simple letters that represent the zodiac. So already we're seeing stuff that we understand from pop culture has roots in not a dead language, but a language that was used probably even, well, I mean, these people were clearly working off the stars and were inspired by their own stories that they've had. But to me, it's always striking or funny, however you want to think about it, that like these ancients were kind of onto something that we still use in a modern context.
Well, on to something, or really only had this to work from.
Right, right. I mean, like their frame of reference was very large in its own way, but very small, and especially compared to now. They didn't have the internet. But now we'll be using this language that's clearly ripe with symbolism and speaking them in such a way that will give them movement and resonance. The method we will use is called intonement. Think about the way that Buddhist monks chant. They're doing the Om during meditation. You are using the body and the breath to resonate at the frequency of these words. Over time, you're going to realize how powerful words are. In fact, they're so powerful, all God had to say was, "Let there be light," and there was light. We're taught in Sunday school that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. What is a word other than an auditory manifestation of a thought or a concept? You can't have words without the physical structure to make them or perceive them. It's almost as if the physical structures of the world developed in part to allow for the concepts floating wherever thoughts come from to be heard and understood. I'm going to try to phrase this another way, maybe as a question. Did words eventually happen because we had a mouth to make sounds and ears to hear? Or did the ear and mouth develop because there was a universal need to deliver thoughts to others?
I would argue that it is less about it's less about the chicken and the egg of the ear and the mouth, and more about the need to create language to be able to actually be able to, like, to be able to reach out and touch someone from a, not philosophical, the word isn't what I want to use, to be able to reach out and touch someone from a intellectual standpoint. You need to have some way to give that person your thoughts, and the way we do it is with language.
Yeah, I mean, because clearly, like, at least as far as we know, we can't, communicate telepathically. I mean, maybe some people can. I sure as hell can't.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you ever think about how sometimes, like, you'll be sitting there and you go and you look at your phone and you don't know why you necessarily did, but then you get your message from your sweetie, and it's like, was that just a coincidence? Or, but how many times does that have to happen in your life before you kind of think that it is sort of this other sense that you kind of know when that other person has reached out to you? And could you argue that that's in a sense some form of telepathy?
Maybe, the things that are manifesting here on our understanding of reality, this plane of existence, the plane of matter, that they are following the Fibonacci sequence of the universe, and that's kind of preordained to a point, and we're just like kind of piloting in part this vehicle almost like a roller coaster, like it has a track, but we're somehow consciously aware of the things that are happening. I'm curious though if somehow that's still a function of, like, again, if we're following this line of thinking, it's somehow God communicating with itself. It's you communicating with yourself through different mouths, essentially. If you have a need to share information or communicate with different aspects of the self, then there needs to be the instruments in which to be able to do that.
Well, sure, and I get that, but I think that doesn't necessarily talk to my point, or my question of, like, could you not think of that intuition you get to look at your phone at the right time as a form of telepathy between you and your significant other?
Oh, that specifically? I think it could be.
I think that also depends upon what I'd said before about, like, what the definition is that you're working off of for when it comes to, like, what you want to define as or rope into when it comes to telepathy. Because, and I'll have to find the YouTube video that I'd found about this, but there has been some research recently that suggests that there is more to us seeing than just the absorption of light. And I sent this to you as an email the one day where you were at work, that would suggest that when we see and look at things, that there is more interaction with the world going on than we really are kind of acutely aware of with that. Such as if you understand the phenomena of like when you feel like something's watching you, that there is perhaps an explainable physical phenomena that occurs that you can train and more or less like expound upon personally to better receive and get this better act on this information over time. So like, when you look at someone and they're not looking at you but they feel you looking at you and then they turn and look, that this is a mechanism that we do and we output some kind of information from ourselves, and that the receiver can train themselves to better understand it and better be tuned into it, and that this may have been some sort of an evolutionary thing.
But there's something to be said, though, about the power of the subconscious mind. Like if we dive even a little bit into Carl Jung, there's the idea of the collective unconscious, where your conscious mind is connected to your subconscious, and then your subconscious is kind of connected to this ocean of thought or dreams or whatever that's kind of behind everybody's thoughts, behind the veil, behind everybody's thoughts. So,
Right.
and that could just be language to try to describe a phenomenon. It doesn't necessarily have to be spooky, but it certainly sure as hell does sound a little spooky. But so maybe that there's something in that structure, or not that structure, but that system that allows us to have some kind of linking with one another, where there's an aspect of our consciousness that can see each other, for lack of a better term, on this ocean of thought. So
Yeah, and it's possible that's what that is, and I think from the perspective that they were looking at it from is that it is the idea that while a lot of what we believe our sight and what looking is just fully receptive, like it's fully receiving, that there may actually be more to it than just reception of light and information. That when we look somewhere, we may be projecting information as well that can be picked up and trained to understand, not just from a spiritual standpoint, but also from a physical, in real life. You can train yourself to be better at catching when people are looking at you.
I think that a lot of this stuff is just our best explanation for science that we just don't have yet, is really what it comes down to. Now, I do believe in the spiritual side of it, but to me, I think that those inherently go hand in hand. We are going to pause this conversation here because it is running a little long. We will be picking it up on next week's episode, though. Until then, please like and subscribe. Go poke and touch us on the internet. Tell us what you'd like to hear. And if you stop by our socials, please say hi. We like it when you say hi.